hit record so we can capture the full glory of this presentation. I want to, first of all, again, thank the Speakers Committee who, without their continued support, the DADAH lecture series would not be made possible. It is because of their financial support that we were able to bring such wonderful artists, art historians, and critics to the Webster DADAH community each Friday. So again, thank you for continuing to support us with that. This week we have two amazing artists who actually work collaboratively. The first of which is Jon Swindler. Jon is an associate professor of art and the acting associate director of the Lamar Dodd School of Art at the University of Georgia in Athens. He holds a BFA in studio art and art education from Fort Hays State University in Hays, Kansas, and an MFA from the Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. Over the last several years, he has exhibited his work in numerous solo, competitive, and invitational exhibitions, both nationally and internationally, and has performed visiting artist workshops and lectures at various institutions, including the Kansas City Art Institute in Kansas City, Missouri, HDK School of Design and Craft in Dalslangen, Sweden, and the Society of Northern Alberta Print Artists in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Also joining us today is Professor Mike McFalls. McFalls is a practicing artist who received his BFA in Fine Arts from the Columbus College of Art and Design in Ohio and his MFA from the University of California at Davis. He is currently the director of Passaquan as well as the director of the Bo Bartlett Center in Columbus, Georgia. His past accomplishments include completing a 6-month Fulbright Fellowship in Sweden at the University of Gothenburg, HDK Stenby, as well as receiving numerous scholarships and awards, including the Pitzerker Foundation Endowed Fellowship, the College of the Arts Teaching Award, College of Arts Faculty Research Award, as well as being nominated for the University Regents Excellence in Teaching Award. Mike has been a resident at Sculpture Space Inc., the Jurassic Residence Artist Program, and Australian National University, and has also been a visiting artist at Dartmouth College and Furman University. McFalls has had numerous exhibitions at national and international venues. Like I said, these two have actually been working collaboratively for the past about 6 years, and they are here today to sort of share their collaborative process and what they work on as a duo. So without further ado, if you guys want to take it over.
You forgot one thing.
What did I forget?
I was your professor.
Oh, yeah. How did I forget that? Mike and me go way back. Mike actually is the reason why I went over to the dark side of sculpture. So for those of you that have taken sculpture with me, you have this man to blame.
I would say thank.
Or to thank,
We're sharers here.
Depending on how much you liked my class.
Yeah. Well, do you want to, should we start?
Screen?
Yeah, you can go ahead and share your screen.
All right, make sure this is working.
We are seeing it.
So Emily, I first want to say thank you for the warm introduction, and you should be like a game show host or something. You do a really good job at kind of delivering that information in a very quick, concise, but cheery way. So I appreciate that.
Presentations are hard.
Yes, I appreciate that. And, but I'm Mike McFalls, just in case you didn't know. And then below me on my screen is Jon Swindler. So he's in the gray t-shirt.
Fine. Yeah, so I'm above Mike and my screen. So anyhow, we're going to keep today, I think, fairly jovial and conversational because it is Friday the 13th and it's 2020. So, there's a reasonable chance that a bomb is dropped upon us in the middle of this. So
it already has. What are you talking about?
A literal bomb.
Yeah.
Or hopefully we don't bomb. Hey, anyway, so I think what we're going to do is just basically kind of go through our collaborations chronologically, talk a little bit about sort of how we came together and how we've ended up on this kind of path of working, fairly closely together here for going on 6 years. The first slides, and Mike, feel free to interrupt at any point. So these first slides are from our first collaboration, which actually happened in Sweden, which was part of a Fulbright that Mike was awarded to go and study blacksmithing. Correct me if I'm off on that. And
and that first picture was the coal from that we used in the forges at the institution, and that was something we became fascinated by, and we'll end up talking about a little later here. But so to kind of give you context of what you're looking at, I think those are my shoes there, or one of those pairs of my shoes. Yeah.
Throughout you'll see many like kind of installation shots, us working in the spaces, and there are always photographs of Mike and never of me because I do most of the documenting. A lot of like pictures of Mike making the work, which I promise I'm there as well. But we actually began that. We met down at Columbus State University. I came down and did a short-term residency, and Mike took me out for tacos and then beers later. And then we said, hey, let's make art together. And it kind of went from there because I had already done a number of collaborations. I've been collaborating with a variety of artists for, going on 10 years or so. And at this point in my practice, that's just kind of standard. I don't really tend to separate like my own work from the work that I make with other people. I find we'll talk a lot about this, but the idea of engaging with another artist's mind is one that creates a lot of challenges and it creates discomfort. But in that discomfort, there's opportunities for growth and there's opportunities for learning. And the collaborations with Mike always turn out, but there's always moments of kind of tension and I wouldn't say distrust necessarily, but it is kind of hard when you're sort of like egos on the line in a sense. And so this does a really good job of sort of like forces you to suspend your ego and it kind of cuts it off at the knees sometimes. And so for me, that's been probably the most beneficial part of this.
And to add to this, I will go back. I met Jon at Columbus State, and he's kind of being a little dismissive because he was here as a visiting artist, and he gave an amazing lecture, and he touched upon this idea of collaboration, and I saw immediately in his work that we had a certain similar sensibility, even though I was working in the three-dimensional space and he was working with collaged kind of prints. It was one of those moments that I could see we could probably work together in a three-dimensional space or in an installation kind of environment. So that came up pretty quickly in our discussions. But I will say I was always suspicious of collaboration. In fact, I came to this without any positive experiences with collaboration. In fact, the collaboration I had before the collaborations I started doing with Jon was with a colleague, and I won't name names because it was in St. Louis years ago, but probably 12 years ago. And it was an absolute disaster. And I had promised myself at that point, I will never collaborate again. And then I met Jon, and I think it was 3 beers in, he convinced me to try it. So that's how this all began.
Yeah, it was lubricated. Go
ahead.
So our first collaboration, you're basically seeing sort of the byproduct of that. These prints laying on the floor in a studio in Sweden. This is at the HDK. Of course, these guys are blowing leaves outside. So let me know if this is noisy and I can relocate.
It's not that loud. You're good.
Okay. In any case, this is in a studio at the HDK School of Craft and Design in Dalslandet, Sweden. This is where Mike had been holed up. We began our collaboration there remotely. So Mike began simply by sending me images of photographs that he was taking, and I was playing with those digitally and manipulating those via Photoshop primarily, and then using those to create basically large scale prints. And so these all have digital layers, and then on top of those digital layers are screen printed layers primarily.
And to kind of go back to how these things happen, it was, I would take a picture, I'd send it to Jon, he would manipulate it in Photoshop and then send it back to me. And then I would do drawing. So that was working more analog. And then Jon would take that drawing and duplicate that drawing over the top of the surface. And so he was producing, mass amount of material very quickly via this kind of digital phone tag.
So that was kind of one part of this. We had no idea what we were going to do. We just knew that I was over there for, I think, about 3 weeks. And that was the amount of time that we had to create this installation in a very large space. It's probably a 3,000 square foot gallery or so, at least. And it was just a large cube.
That's me working, Jon not working, honestly.
Another component of this was Mike had this idea for suspending these birch trees, which were abundant around this sort of part of rural Sweden. And Mike, I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
So at the time we were living we had a house, my family and I had a house in rural Sweden, and in the backyard were these trees, and I just kept having this image, and I would tell Jon that, I want to use these birch trees, and through the commune in Dalslanget in Bengtsfors, Sweden, they allow you, they give you trees there. I mean, you just go to the commune and say, I need so many birch trees, and they drop them all off at the university for me. I just had to trim them to fit into the gallery. But I had this idea that I wanted that you would walk in the gallery and these trees were all upside down, representing both, maybe a root system or something like that, but also this kind of repetition that I was feeling as you would walk through the birch woods right behind the house. I mean, I lived in the middle of nowhere in Sweden. And Jon was up for it. I said, I'm not sure why we're going to do this or how we're going to do this, but I'll figure that part out before you get here. But once we get here, we'll play around with it in the space.
And that's exactly what we did, is we really kind of played, because we'd never done this together. And so it kind of felt like a play date.
Yeah, in Sweden.
An adult play date with a bunch of art materials. So prints, tape, trees, and various other kind of materials. So we started in a space that I was very comfortable in. I actually teach printmaking primarily at UGA, and I use printmaking primarily as a means to create kind of like resources and piles from which to sort of extricate and create collages and other things with. And so I had never done anything near this scale. And so we took those prints that you had seen in the previous slides and began to basically just kind of chop them up. And then we used tape, this black artist tape, as kind of like a mortar. And so this thing had a kind of like a very natural kind of, but semi-architectural feel to it that just kind of took up the corner. And then alongside that, we had all these little kind of playing at the same time. So this image on the left is kind of us kind of playing and almost like a sketchbook with additional materials. And on the right, you see further progress on those suspended trees, which ended up being kind of a diptych, which I'll show you here in a subsequent slide. So this is what that wall became. We took a couple of those birch trees and sort of trimmed them up further, and then kind of didn't dip them, but wanted them to feel as though they had been dipped in this kind of like silver paint, just to give this piece a bit more. I think this is Mike's the sculptor and I'm the flat person. And so that's another way that we're able to kind of push each other, is that Mike thinks more in 3 dimensions and I tend to be more 2-dimensional. And so you can see that in a way, if things begin to get a little too flat, Mike comes in and like puts something on it or like pulls something out of it, and I tend to sort of like compress and mash into a flatter space. So here's kind of and as you can see, a lot of this, again, this is all very much on the fly, kind of responding to one another. So these sort of like kind of pseudo shadows that the trees project onto that wall. And then this in the foreground is an image of our very first pile that we made together, and we've been making piles ever since.
Well, and the piles we talk about these piles a lot. We've gone back and forth, but I think at this point we realized this was this repository of information that had no hierarchy, and we were we would grab from it and we would pile it back up, and then we would put things back in. And it was just this give and take. And it became essential to the understanding of that environment, I think. And it was, I'll give Jon all the credit. He was the one that realized that. You know, I told Jon, there's no way I'm going to have a show with you where we're just hanging prints. So we're going to rip up those prints and cut them up and, you know, and do something with them. And Jon, you know, I'll give him credit. I wanted to take this pile out at one point, but I think it became like this center point within this installation that we created.
And you know, the pile is the thing we kind of keep returning to, and we'll talk about it, I think, probably through different lenses here and the way that they function. And I think the way that I kind of think about and access that idea of a pile is different than the way Mike does, which again is, you know, the reason to collaborate is because you have, you know, it's not uncommon for Mike and I to be kind of discussing something and thinking we're talking about the same thing, but we're actually and not. But that's like really useful. Yeah. So this is the final manifestation of the tree piece. And honestly, I would say in this first collaboration, this space was very much kind of bifurcated. You know, like I feel like this piece had much more of Mike in it, and I think the wall piece had much more of me.
That's kind of funny because I think the exact opposite of that, but that's a typical kind of thing that Jon and I do. There's this call and response and play going on. I often look at this piece. I had this kind of initial idea of what it might look like in my head through some sketches that I was doing while I was in Sweden. I did 50 or 60 drawings kind of about these birch trees. But I never knew how they would kind of manifest themselves in this space. I actually knew a couple things that I wanted to do is to incorporate these neon lights and incorporate the coal from the forges that we were using. And that's, so on the bottom there is about, I don't know, a half a ton of coal, I think, on the ground, or maybe a little less than that. But long story short, once we got it in there, I think that became an opportunity with Jon to play, to begin to have this dialogue going back and forth where at many moments I maybe didn't agree, but Jon would say, how about we try this? And I would try it and say, oh yeah, that kind of works. And I think working collaboratively, at least for me, often gives you permission, you know, I was saying this earlier today with Jon, to productively fail. Like, it's okay if it's a failure, you're still going to be able to kind of readjust and reevaluate the process that you're going through with the work, and you'll come up with something that you might not necessarily know how you got there, but you're pretty sure that there's something more interesting in it than actually if you had preconceived this idea in some way. Because this ends up looking nothing like I preconceived it. I think I had a few drawings of trees upside down, but it was never going to be like this. So, but in it, I can't remember how many birch trees were there, but there's probably a dozen birch trees. One of the most beautiful things that I don't have a photograph of, but Jon maybe didn't know, I think you knew this, I think I told you this, was after, it was an unexpected thing, which I think kind of really made sense with this piece. After Jon left, I was still in Sweden, and I got a call from the gallery, and they said that the birch trees were all blooming because they were cut when it was really cold, and then when they came inside, they began to bloom right in that space. And it's not like they fully bloomed, but they budded, and some of the leaves came out, and actually pollen was coming out. And they were complaining because of the pollen, because somebody that worked at the gallery was allergic to the pollen. So, but anyhow, long story short, but yeah, I feel like I can't, even though this is bifurcated or very binary looking, and it's our first collaboration, I really feel like I can't say, oh, that's my side or that's my piece, where I feel like I really engaged quite a bit with the printmaking and playing with the trees on that other side of the wall. So it's funny that way. I feel like I can't take ownership of that in any way. I blame you for that, Jon.
You're welcome. Well, we're going to move to our next project. So this is a smaller scale project we did at Marshallwood Gallery in Atlanta, actually right between Mike and I, basically. Atlanta's kind of a midway point between Columbus and Athens. And so at the time, Marshallwood was doing a call for kind of special projects. And so we put our name in the hat and So we did an installation, and in this work, we actually it was the first time that we actually had some leftovers from our project. So Mike had brought back some of the printed matter, and so that piece on the left here, that this kind of hanging over that log, some of those are printed remnants from the Sweden show. So everything that we've made, and this is one of the things that I think about in relation to this idea of these piles, is this material kind of existing in different states. You know, I always kind of go back to my growing up on a farm in Kansas. I know Kansas and Missouri don't always get along, but you know, it's but growing up on a farm in Kansas, and there are always just being piles of raw materials, wood and metal, hardware of various sorts, and all of that stuff was there just as a repository from which to cull and use those materials as a resource to like fix things, to invent things. And so in my own practice, I found myself doing the exact same thing. And that's something that that came about though through this collaboration with Mike. And because I think that's in one of the things that he does was with his work, is sort of like collecting these things and then assembles them in space, whereas mine were always two-dimensional. And then this was our first kind of intentional pile. The first pile from the previous installation was again kind of a byproduct of like, oh, this is kind of something's kind of interesting here, and it was literally just a pile in the middle of the room that we decided to leave there. And not that it wasn't orchestrated at all, but this one definitely was. And Mike and I were kind of going through these slides before we got in here, and Mike said, "Ooh, that's not a very good one," which I think it's so.
I haven't seen it in a while, and I don't think I frequently show it when I give a talk about my own work and our practice together. But one thing I will say, you know, I did make assemblage like work prior to working with Jon, and I was moving more into kind of assemblage installation. But I will say the thing that working with Jon has done is it's provided me a freedom in some way to let go and even to not think of the work as precious. Jon is a constant foil in this kind of discourse that we're having in these spaces. Again, you have to consider none of these are pre-planned, but a lot of this is just detritus from my own studio, really. And some of it is, what is great is when we had a show, and I don't think we're going to show that exhibition. I think it's a better pile, Jon, actually. But the show we had at Columbus State, and the students came in, and all the students kept saying, "Hey, that's my work," like because it was something they were throwing out, and I would just grab it out of the garbage and flock it or something like that. So, you know, what we really do is we end up, nothing is precious. Nothing is taken for granted in these things. Nothing is better or worse than something else. We kind of tear those things down in these works, or we at least are attempting to do that. I mean, obviously that doesn't happen. I often put these these bronze spacemen in, and then Jon takes them out somehow. So you can see one actually right there. And these are from previous works of mine that never made it, but that's like a bronze spaceman from some of my own work.
I bet they can't see that, Mike.
No, you can't? Oh, I thought they could. I can see it.
I did throw those slides in from that collaboration. So in this show as well, we made some kind of small, discreet kind of framed works with the idea of like, hey, it's a commercial gallery, maybe we'll sell something. We did not.
We didn't sell anything. Although I got a couple in my house. Everybody loves them when they come by.
And so this was a show that we had here in Athens at Linden House Art Center. And Tate, were you back around? Did you see this show? Okay, that's when I think the last time I saw you in the flesh. So this was a kind of a small side gallery at Linden House here in Athens, which is our local community art center. I threw in some additional pics of kind of our process of making. So every time we come together again, we fold in materials that have previously been used. And then we always try to affect that material in some way, right? Through painting it or the application of flock, which is a material that Mike introduced me to. And there's so many great jokes associated with flocking, but I won't get it.
Well, we have a lot of fun talking about those jokes when we're making, but usually it's because we're inhaling too much of the flocking, or what are you flocking talking about? you know. But the one thing you'll notice, we keep reusing, but we're always adding to our kind of repertoire and material gathering. And often what we do is I'll drive up with a truckload of stuff, and we'll go into these museums and galleries, and we'll show up. That's the best part. We show up. They asked us what we're doing. We say, we're not sure yet, but we got a lot of stuff here. We pull up to the loading dock. We open the back of the truck, and nothing's packed. Like, you know, Emily used to make my crates when she was my intern. Nothing's packed in crates anymore. It's just a truckload of junk. And we ask them to dump it out into the gallery and let us play with it. And we take about a week, sometimes 4 days. This one, I think, took us 4 days, I bet. And we all are working in their parking lots or working in some, you know, strange space that's not really set up for art, painting things, flocking things. And it's a, you know, it's never pre-planned in any way. But in some ways, though, I think we've done this now, and especially at this point, you begin to trust that it will happen, is what I always say. I just trust it'll happen. And really, Jon kind of taught me to trust that. I think I was, like I said, I was suspicious in the beginning, less so now, but often we come in and we just start playing in that space. So this is the piece we did there at the Linden House.
Yeah, and you see that large kind of another one of those print collage installations on the back wall, and I showed I'll just go back. This is an image of actually on the press using digital inkjet and then pressure printing on top of those. So pressure printing is a really stupid but fun way to make a relief print. Essentially, it's kind of a monoprint relief print. And it was something that my colleague was using in letterpress, and I thought I should be doing that on a larger scale, and have been kind of using it ever since. So, and then Mike and I will team up, and he printed this with me, and then we hired a grad student to help us kind of pull this stuff. Because honestly, on the printing stuff anymore, on a lot of this kind of stuff, we're not necessarily looking for an image. We're just looking for sort of like a level of density, or a level of a certain kind of wanting the thing to sort of function at a certain frequency. And so you can kind of tell somebody like, print a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you can kind of get where you want to go. And then because invariably that stuff's going to get broken down anyway, it doesn't really matter that it's like, you know, just right.
Yeah. So you can go ahead, Jon, but please excuse, there's a guy out here, you know, doing some blowing with a blower. So if you hear that's why I went on mute there. But one thing that's really nice, my wife's a printmaker. I'm not a printmaker. And my wife won't let me touch her printing presses. And I went up to Athens to work in Jon's studio for this project. And Jon said, I got to go teach class. Do whatever the hell you want. And I'm like, do what you want. So I just started laying things and inking them up and running them through the press, and thinking, and I told my wife, I called her and she said, you can't put that kind of stuff through the press. And I said, well, Jon let me. So, but the other funny thing, and really what the beauty of this collaboration is Jon will come to my studio sometimes, and I got him on the plasma cutter, and he's making cuts with that plasma cutter in a way that nobody should make cuts. And he's like, oh, it looks great. And, you know, and it's terrible. He doesn't set it right. It's making slag all over the place. And then, you know, he thinks it's beautiful. Or I'll spend all the time making something perfect, and Jon will inherit, you know, I'll leave and Jon will have it smashed to pieces when I get back. I mean, that's just how Jon operates. So I think that kind of freedom to let go a little bit is at least what Jon allows, and I think what we allow each other in this process.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes another artist put it to me this way. It's like, you know, it's kind of like, it's not just about lighting the dumpster on fire. It's like kicking the dumpster over at a certain point. It's like, you know, completely. And I think everybody experiences that in the studio, right? Like, you know, there's creating, and I think what we do through the collaboration is we create circumstances for that to occur. We create circumstances where it's like, oh, what have we gotten ourselves into this time? Like, what kind of a mess do we have to make in order to sort of recover this? And that's what happens each time we come together. So, I'm going to kind of get through this project here. This is the last little bit. I do like to share. So this was sort of a small little table that we created for the front of the space. This is still one of my favorite things we've ever made. And all this is like leftover from one of Mike's pieces, this black metal kind of welded together, like
powder coated. It was like finely powder coated.
And then we set it inside of this cheap like plastic paint tray, and they just like harmonized in such a beautiful way. And I'm just such a sucker for those kind of beautiful kind of moments where things that are inherently sort of disparate come together and they just work in a really beautiful way.
Yeah, I think that's well said, John. I mean, the one thing I really enjoy working with John is he will frequently notice something that everybody else is overlooking and make us aware of it. And you can see that in the work that he makes, but you can also see how he does that and it's hard to see in these installations because you don't really get those moments where you walk around. But John, every time I make a big pile of something that's really big and ambitious, he always comes in and he puts like a little thing in there and it just makes it sing all of a sudden. He has that ability to catch those moments.
I'm gonna move on to our Boise State show. So this was at Boise State. Was this 2017 or 18, Mike?
I think it was 2018.
Okay.
I think it was at like early 2018.
I'll let you talk about this because I only had the opportunity to come up for about 4 days during this one, and so Mike got up there a few days before I did. And you might want to talk a little bit about the work you did with the students because I didn't have the opportunity to and this was another fairly large space we had to tackle. We didn't have the opportunity to work prior to the show. So Mike did an excellent job of getting the students involved here.
Well, and this was an opportunity with Boise State University where when we talked to them about doing this exhibition in their space, I said, well, I don't think we'll ever bring in new material, right? We can't draw, I just didn't have the time to bring a U-Haul full of our stuff. So actually everything we used in this exhibition, except a bunch of printed material that I put in my suitcase, I just showed up with a suitcase as basically with some print material. And I worked with a class and talked about this collaborative process that John and I used, showed them the work, told them to have some fun and play around. And we all started working. So those early images, John was here at this point, but those early images were myself and the students working in the space. And these classes from Boise State would just come in and out. And it was a wonderful kind of play. And students were playing with each other from classes. They said, oh, I know who did that little part of that drawing, because I'd let them draw on things or bring their own image making material in. And then they would destroy their friends' work. And they were having a blast. And there was a group of them that kept just kind of popping in and out. But it ended up, and when John finally got there, John came in, I think I was making one of these structures and I thought I didn't have any tools either. So I was like, I'm going to make the most pathetic structure I can and see what John says. And he came in and I think you said you loved it. And so, and I kind of thought I was doing it as a joke at first, but then we did fall in love with these kind of wooden structures that we were making that were really, if you look at those 1x and 1x1s and 1x2s, what you would see is they were all this material that we were just laying out while we were making other things, and it's just the residue from the other processes left behind on them, right? So it's just the thing that was unplanned. So but you can see some of the things that we were doing there, but you have to kind of remember what happened was I just showed up with a suitcase, not knowing what we were going to do, and this was still one of my favorite shows.
Yeah, it was a good space, and
I think it's that community intervention that helped it in some ways.
I think so. So in the foreground you see these kind of like bulbous little ceramic pieces. Those were actually donated for the show by one of the ceramics professors. On the back wall, that sort of chain link wall piece, which is as close to a painting as I'll make, but
it was a painting professor that kept the other parts. It was like It was this leftover thing she had.
Donated that for so it was really a kind of a community effort. Like a lot of people contributed both effort and materials, and then Mike and I were able to just kind of play with that. So this is our painting, I suppose.
That's our masterpiece, our modernist masterpiece.
Our drop cloth, the drop cloth that was used to kind of, again, like build and accumulate kind of a surface on all of those 1x2s and 2x2s are, that drop cloth just had such a beautiful kind of like formal innocence that we use that as kind of a blanket to put it over top of that collage that the students made. So, giving the students some kind of crude instruction, like, hey, this is how we make those large collages, and trying to share that information yielded this, which actually was, really effective. And all of this stuff has been folded into subsequent works as well. So, but, and I think there's even, another thing that Mike and I pay a lot of attention to is sort of like art school failures, like not the individual, not people as failures, but artworks as failures. There's always that stuff sort of littered about at the art school. And I tend to be attracted to that stuff in various ways. There's always sort of like leftover plates or sculpture projects, wood projects. And I kind of like collect that stuff because it ends up getting a second life. But it is so interesting to have an object that somebody at one point like really gave a shit about, like really cared about this thing, and they put a lot of effort into it, and then it didn't meet those expectations. Like I find that to be like really interesting, sad in a way, that they abandoned this thing that was important for them for at least a short period of time. So I always think some of those things kind of possess an inherent sort of like, I don't know, just there's a quality to them. And so Mike and I have done I think a pretty good job of sort of paying attention to those things because a lot of these things we do in other art programs, other art schools, things like that. And
so John, I'm going to interrupt you. He's referring to this head, and we were wandering around the Boise State University studios, and there was this head in the garbage. And it was just the most beautiful thing. And it was some student had put all this effort to make this head. It was made out of Bondo. That was the funnier part of it. It was like they took Bondo and they sculpted it like that. And John found it. I was like, this thing is gorgeous. And I said, let's flock it. Like, why not? That seems like the logical thing to do. When you have if you don't know what to do, just flock it is what that's my saying there. And so we flocked it, and it just became this kind of gorgeous centerpiece, this still life of weird, pathetic things that never could make it into art. We decided to turn to art. And I think that's what I was referring to with my students too. When they come to our exhibitions, they always find the crap they can't turn into art in somewhere in these exhibitions. And we seem to find value in them, and they people tend to like that. They're like, oh, they get it. At least people in the language of the art community or the art school or the art institution usually can get that and understand that.
Yeah, and I think it's good for students to see that, because I think oftentimes in art school you sort of I think it's just the culture of art school, and even if it tends to breed this idea of like trying to create like sometimes a masterpiece, like this is the best thing I can do with the skills that I possess, as opposed to like, well, here are these things that I did, and instead of attaching like all of this kind of emotion to it, I think it's better to sort of like remove yourself from that as much as possible. Because I'm a big believer in the illusion of intention. So this idea of like, you put something in a gallery, as and as ridiculous as it may seem, like it does sort of elevate it in a way. And so you can play with that. You can have some real fun with that. Because it's completely, it's a myth, like it's all a myth. And you can kind of play with that myth through I don't know, engaging with materials.
But I think collaboration allows that too. I mean, I think we come at these with no intention of anything having any real value anyways. Like I said, we show up with a suitcase and say, we're going to make art. and you guys want to be part of it. I mean, part of it is like, you know, dismissing that myth in some way, you know, of the masterpiece, and in fact we're actually poking fun at that. It's in some ways that, you know, art is ever in flux. Art is not precious. Art can be play. Art is about process. Art is about this experience, and what you're usually left with is this residue of that experience. So
I threw in some slides from, this was something Mike did for the faculty show, and he used, I did not have a hand in this. Mike and his students did everything here. So I'll talk about it because
you talk about it. I think you should, since I always say it's a collaboration.
It is a collaboration. And I actually think this is, I think maybe because I wasn't involved, it's one of my favorites in a way. I can kind of be more of a viewer in relation to it. But there are just certain tendencies that Mike has that come through more heavily in this. Now, somebody else looking at it may not, they may say, oh, this looks like the other things y'all have made. But I really feel like there's a lot of Mike's sort of personal touches within this. But I do appreciate the fact that like Mike is excellent at getting people together and getting them kind of like working on a shared goal. And it's one of the reasons he's like director of two different kind of institutes. But he did an amazing job with this piece, I think, and all of this material, most of it was created or collected there on site at Columbus State, and you know, he and his students really made that piece. And so I think this is really a testament to like Mike as a collaborator, more than just like with an individual, but just like getting people together, sort of focused on a larger goal.
So, and one thing I'll say about that piece is really fun was we did it outside in a public space out behind the gallery. So it was really public. And that, you see that big drop cloth there, there were 3 of those. And I just brought a bunch of stuff from the my studio, and laid it out in this courtyard. That's about, I don't know, probably 50 yards long. And I would just ask people, do what you want. If you want to paint on this, we had paint cans and everything. Everybody's out there painting. And I mean, just even people off the street were coming in and playing with it. And then the students and I we built this piece in the space. And then my challenge, what I wanted to do was something we've never done, that Jon and I had never done, is I wanted to take one of our piles and then hang it. Like that's that kind of engineering. And this thing weighs about a ton. So I hung it from the ceiling. And that was my goal. So I had to weld up these structures inside, which Jon would never let me do if we were working together. He'd say, no, we're not going to engineer something. But I welded up these structures inside to hang this whole pile up in the air. So, but it was a really fun piece to do. And this kind of gives you an idea of how we work, right by dumpsters and abandoned parking lots and things like that. That's our studio.
Behind the Museum of Arts and Sciences in Macon, Georgia. So kind of another place in between Columbus and Athens, and we went down there. So again, speaking of Mike's engineering, so he made these sort of tripods, and the idea was to make this kind of like a snake form in this space. And I had these weird cardboard discs, which really didn't even end up getting used in the space. We put a lot of time into them, and so that's kind of an example of all these discs that are laying back there. I don't know, maybe here's more of them. They're quite beautiful, but we never really found a good use for them, so they didn't really end up in the piece.
Well, they ended up in centerpieces. You remember that?
Yeah, they had like a reception for people.
Oh, they didn't even ask. They just put them in the center of this donor reception or something, and I was like, what?
And then this thing in the front. Anyway.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, skipping around. So here's what it looked like. We didn't get great documentation of this piece. It was a really difficult space to kind of photograph in, and this piece probably ended up being, it dominated the space, and in kind of an interesting way, because it forced you to really kind of like get close to it. You could actually walk behind it if you wanted to. We are always a little bit mindful of like kids, because we both have kids, and a lot of opportunities to poke one's eye out on this thing. But I think one of my favorite things that came out of this was actually the use of those behind this piece. You'll see kind of above it, those drop cloths, or basically like a moving blanket.
Yeah.
Mike could use those to pack materials, and then we decided to throw it into the piece, and we've been playing with those ever since.
Yeah.
Again, it was just like a material, kind of like the drop cloths that we had used previously. It was a practical material. You see them here again. This is our next one at Valdosta State University in South Georgia. Using those as a way to kind of like for practical means, but also as a way to sort of like collect, the detritus, the stuff that kind of falls off of these works.
Yeah, I call the moving blankets our tapestries. They feel there's something really, they just reminded me of these tapestries I was seeing in, Western Europe when I was going to these museums, and there was something about the way they were hanging. I was like, oh, these are our tapestry series here, John. So, but they keep ever changing, and now we're printing on them and things like that. So this is our exhibition in Valdosta, VSU.
And these are a series of prints, and those black kind of silhouette things you see on the wall. Those are actually the negatives from some laser cuts that I was working on and using as printing matrices. And so I brought those with, and we flocked those and kind of adorn the wall. And then we used that the drop cloth as a way to sort of like act as a sheath to sort of like subdue those. I mean, I think this is actually pretty effective, but we're also, I guess, as mentioned before, we're always looking for ways to sort of like turn the whole thing upside down and create new challenges for ourselves. So we laid that on top and then went through and this thing functions very much like a painting, I suppose. And went through and sort of surgically, removed information, used the tape a little bit. And then on the opposing wall, to me, I still look at this and it looks like a pile of like trash, just like horizontal, like it just feels like, something that you would see on
I thought it was as beautiful as the Frank Stella. What are you talking about, man? I was just sitting there. No, I mean, in some ways I thought I was playing with that. Yes, it could be just that pile of trash just put on the wall, but also, and the stuff that we couldn't, it really is our pile that we never could do something with. And we just put it up onto the wall this time to see how that would work. But, and I'd like to say that one piece that he was showing earlier, what was really nice is I often think what John and I are doing, and I actually have a painting background, I feel like we're often drawing and painting in space. It's this kind of give and take going on all the time. And I often think the elements we're using are just like any kind of paint stroke or paint element or something like that. We tend to react in a very, I guess, from the gut at times, because that's what you're forced with when you're left in these kind of moments, and you have to begin to trust it.
And then this was the most recent pile, because actually the last thing that we're almost toward the end here. This is the second to last project. So we decided to kind of coat everything in black, which was honestly at the time seemed appropriate for a variety of reasons. But we're gonna laugh about it now. But the structure underneath was all Mike, like that. And so I think this piece, was kind of playing with, just simultaneous contrast of that sort of naked wood and right angles with the sort of chaos of all of that. Again, you're seeing the repurposing of all of those materials that we've been using throughout. Sorry if I keep flipping around here a little too much.
No, and just to add to that, I mean, I think one thing that John and I do is I often come in, because I feel most comfortable with this, with an idea. Like, I'm going to build this structure. I'll tell John, I'm going to make this. I'm going to do something that gives me a certain physical reaction to the space. And John is usually the one that counters that. Like I said, he's the one that if I build something really nice, he'll kick it over or knock it down, and I think there's, so these structures you're seeing, that's that urge for me to have a little bit of that control, I think. But I've noticed that control is less and less important to me as we move forward.
Yeah, and this was just another, example using one of those moving blankets, drop cloths, and, just pinning a print on it, and it ended up being like one of our favorite things in the.
I think it's my favorite print we've done, out of everything. I still love this one. I think we need to. Do you have that?
I don't know.
I don't have it.
Or maybe make another one.
We'll make another one, yeah.
So this is the most recent project, and I know we're running short on time here. So this was at Lamar Dodd School of Art. So our gallery director here, Katie Geha, asked Mike and I to come and do an installation for a series in our Plaza Gallery, which is a space that you enter off the bridge on the. I'm not going to get into it. Anyway, it's a large entryway gallery in the School of Art, and so she invites artists to come twice a year, so one in the fall, one in the spring, to do an installation that stays up the entire semester. Because of COVID, this thing's going to be a year old in January, so we are the longest running Plaza artist ever, right? Yeah, so we did these again, a little bit of pre-planning. Basically, we were kind of playing with the idea of like a shallow relief or a frieze, because we knew we couldn't just do a pile in the middle of the floor. This is a space that people have to traverse through. So we wanted to just address the walls, and so we were playing with the idea of a frieze. And so Mike quite literally used a frieze from his. I think you were teaching abroad the summer before, and
yeah, I was in Florence, and this was one of the. This was in Florence, yeah. We won't go into that detail, which artist it is and everything, but yeah.
And my frieze was the window of the shop of my family's farm in Kansas, and so we're kind of like two very like culturally different sort of approaches to that idea, and so and then we reused that. You see that drop cloth from the Valdosta show being reused.
No, that's a different drop cloth.
No, that's the Valdosta one.
No, that's the one that was outside. Anyhow, we don't have to get in front of them. I mean, but I'm pretty sure that's a different one.
I'm pretty sure.
It was a brand new one. I started it there on the ground outside of the Lamar Dodd School. I'm 100% sure, dude.
Agree to disagree.
Agree to disagree. That was the new one.
Oh, maybe you're right. You're right.
All right. So you're looking at two different walls. These walls are literally directly across from one another. And so one side ended up reusing a lot of that black material that we used at Valdosta, and the other one, as you'll see, kind of was much lighter and much flatter. So in a way, we kind of went in different directions, and I felt like and you see these framed prints over top, which were made specifically for this installation. I see some bits in there from the other piece. So this is the final version of one side. It's not intended to look like North America sans Florida, but that's one of the comments that's come out of it. Which, if you're from Florida, I'm sorry, but I'm okay with that.
Just didn't fit.
And then this was the opposing side. So these still exist, and that's kind of how they function together. And shortly after this was finished, COVID-19 came onto the scene, and Mike and I haven't really been able to do anything since.
No, I think I've only seen you a couple times via Zoom. We've had a couple beers on the porch via Zoom. That's about it.
That's about it. So
yeah,
this is where things are, and it's 1:54, but that's pretty
wow, that was long.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.
Well, yeah, Mike, if there's anything I know about you, you are a man who can expound for a very long time about any subject. So,
well, obviously Jon can too, because I think if we time this, Jon talked more than I did.
Well, listen, we're all educators. It's what we do.
Yes.
That's why we're this way. We did get one question in the chat from earlier on from Tate. It said, collaboration seems at first like a throwing up your hands and whatever happens, happens. How do you grow a relational mutual understanding of being critical of each other's artistic decisions?
Oh, that's a good question. You want to go first, Jon, and see if we actually agree on this, or you want me to?
Well, I know Tate quite well, so I'm not going to even answer that question.
Okay. Well, I will say, first of all, I didn't trust, I think, Jon that much when we first started. But I do think it depends on trust. I think in the beginning, you start asking questions, maybe with a little doubt. You're wondering if they're telling you the truth or if they really believe what they're saying. But ultimately, I think the longer we've worked together, the more at least I can speak for me, the more I trust Jon's instincts. And the other thing is, I don't hold back at all. Jon I feel so comfortable with Jon that I can say whatever I think, even if it's just, Jon, that stinks, I don't like it, and this is why. I don't feel like I have to hold back in any way. But so the reason I think it's successful, or the way we create a kind of critical dialogue, is that we believe and trust in each other, I guess. But I mean, I think there are times now with reflection, like every time I do a lecture like this, I sit there and go, what the hell were we thinking there? But ultimately it's about that process and that experience at that moment. And really what we have here is that residue of those moments in some way. I don't know what you want to add to that, Jon.
All I would say to that is, I mean, I think that is something that Mike and I try to be mindful of. We certainly don't want to just keep making the same piece over and over. Like, here's one on the wall, and here's another. This one's on the ceiling. Like we're not. I mean, certainly there are some kind of practical challenges surrounding that, but I think that the dialogue that we engage in the process of making the work is, kind of like that is such an important part of this, right? And so the things that are affecting the creation of this work, and a lot of that is from we are wanting to challenge ourselves each time with each new kind of problem that we're presented with. So I think as long as we walk away from it being like, okay, this is better, this is better, right?
Yeah.
And on a subjectively, Mike and I looking at it like, this is improvement, this is growth. As long as that continues to happen, I think that satisfies that end of it for us. Neither one of us have had the opportunity to really sit and ponder or write about the work, and what else is there, because as we all know, there's always stuff that the work is touching on that you're not aware of until you really do investigate it, and you start to locate those kind of blind spots, and maybe one or both of us will have time to do that at some point, because that's
obviously COVID, Jon, and we still didn't do it. So no, I'd agree with that, and I believe that ultimately we are, I don't know, I guess I feel that I'm always looking for that next challenge, and I trust that when Jon has an idea that if I don't agree, that Jon will allow me to disagree, and sometimes it's not a verbal language, though. I often feel that it happens in a very in a very kind of I guess instinctual way now. I mean, when we get in these spaces, we can work 8 to 10 hours at a time together, and we're constantly pushing and pulling against each other, reacting and disagreeing in a nonverbal way, which it's fun. And in many ways, I know that I move through visual problems, much quicker this way because of Jon. I mean, I would probably just get stuck in one place without that, but he's always able to kind of make me aware of these probably redundant tendencies that I have, or these problems that I keep running into. He's always able to kind of shift that dialogue very quickly. And I think I do the same for him in many ways.
Right. Well, I'm gonna interject because we gotta wrap it up. But I do want to say, as an outsider who's seeing some of the more work and hearing you guys talk about it in depth for the first time, really. I know I've talked about the collaborative process and you working with Jon to you, Mike, but this is my first time sort of hearing Jon talk about it as well. Something that I see as an outsider is y'all's work seems to exist in this weird intersection of the chaotic and the sublime, or using chaos as a tool to reach the sublime. There's some of these wall pieces that start to look almost like stained glass, but there is no inherent actual discernible image, but rather the idea of what stained glass stands for. So I don't know if you guys have ever thought about those topics, but it's something that I've seen.
Well, I've been thinking about the sublime in art since you were one of my students. I was always talking about those ideas, but I think what's nice about these is they sometimes can have this richness through the screen here, but when you come up to them, they're made out of the cheapest, crappiest material you can find, and that's really kind of this nice play going on. I don't know, John, you seem like you disagree with the graphic material.
No. I mean, it's not about, you know, again, these things are intended to be impermanent, you know, because everything's impermanent, right? I mean, not to get like
too philosophical.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, but then again, that allows us to take, I think, more risks. Therefore, because it's like this thing only has to exist for, you know, a month or 2 months. This thing's been up for almost a year. That's by far the longest anything we've made has existed in a static way.
No, that's exactly right. But that thing about where it seems to have an image, but the image is always breaking down, that is something John and we're always talking about. And if something seems to have too much clarity, we always disrupt that clarity, no matter what. And we usually start with a fairly clear image. If you notice with those, you know, in this piece, they started with these 2 freezes, these 2 photographs, but, you know, we just break it down till it becomes unrecognizable.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm not going to take up too much more of your time. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules and Friday to speak with us. I really appreciate getting to learn more about the work. And yeah, hopefully you guys will, hopefully COVID will come to a stopping point at some point and you guys can destroy the thing that you guys just built and then turn it into something else very soon.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. Thank you for having us. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure.
I love it. I love to see how punk rock you've gotten over so many years, Mike. This is great.
Blame John.
Great. Well, thank you all for tuning in. And as always, I will see you guys next Friday. And in the meantime, have a great weekend.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, John. Bye, Emily.
Thank
it's really good
you.
seeing you.
Thanks, Emily.
Bye, John.
Hey, bye, Brian. Good to see you, Brian.